Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. I think I just wanted to start by expressing my condolences to the family of Justice Jim Burns. He truly was a great public servant, someone who could have rode the coattails of his father, but chose to establish a great legacy of commitment to the people of Hawaii in everything that he did. He truly helped to establish the Intermediate Court of Appeals and the way that justice is provided in the judiciary here in the state of Hawaii. I think more importantly, he was so involved in supporting the university, the medical school, a lot of other very important institutions to the people of the state of Hawaii. So I'm truly saddened and wanted to express Don and my condolences to the family. I can start a little bit about the National Governors Association. Certainly returned. National Governors Association definitely works to be nonpartisan and represent the voices of the nation's governors. This meeting set a record in several different ways. We had 46 governors participating, more than they ever was involved. With Governor Cuomo, Governor Kasich, and a bunch of other states was present. It was, I think, a very good meeting. President Trump is like you see him on the internet. He is exactly like he appears. He's very straightforward and again express his interest in working with governors on behalf of the people of America. And certainly we shared from the governor's perspective the concerns that we have with the Affordable Care Act and some of the changes that have been talked about, and certainly had committed to work with the president and the Congress to find ways that we can make improvements, but assure that those who receive coverage today continue to receive coverage. And I think most importantly, to really create a healthcare system that truly can serve all the people of America as well as Hawaii in a way that assures that people can be healthy and get access to much needed care.
On that point of care, have you yet done any calculations of what the cost of the Medicaid block grant approach might be to Hawaii, whether in terms of covering the remaining costs or decreasing eligibility?
Certainly the governors, Democrat and Republican, made it very clear to the administration and the Congress that if the purpose of the block grants is to reduce cost or shift the costs from the federal government to the state governments, then that really doesn't help us improve services to our communities. So Democrats and Republican governors were adamantly opposed to a change to block grants if simply that's all that they would be doing. Governors had said that certainly any changes would have to be phased in to allow us the ability to respond. Governors had shared that we believe that we understand Medicaid better than the federal government, and if the individual states were given the authority in certain areas, that we could identify ways to save the federal government and state governments funds in the way that the Medicaid program is administered. And certainly we put that forward from the governor's perspective as our commitment to assuring that all of those who get health insurance today can continue to get health insurance.
Is it too early to put a cost on it if it was back in your court?
Well, I think that it really depends, right? It's very clear, and the president had acknowledged that healthcare is complicated, and the devil's in the details. So, we, as I said, had committed that the states were very much interested in working with Congress and the President on finding changes that works for everybody. But that purely, if it's really a focus on just shifting the cost from the federal government to the state government, then that really doesn't advance anybody, and that doesn't really provide improved health care for our communities.
Governor, on the Trump administration, that we're now engaged in the second round of litigation in connection with his immigration policies. Do you think that there's a chance that there might be some pushback from the Trump administration that would cost the state in federal funding, federal assistance? Is that a concern?
You know, from our perspective, we just believe that, you know, discrimination on the basis of national origin or religion is just flat out wrong. And it's important, we believe, especially if you look at the history of the state of Hawaii, for us to say an executive order that discriminates on this basis is just flat out wrong. You know, we do know that there might be other ramifications, but, you know, we trust that people will focus on what's in the best interest of the people of the state of Hawaii, as well as the people of America in moving forward.
We are seeing a lot, though, about proposed cuts to the EPA, and we do rely very heavily on EPA funds for clean water. What's your concern at this point?
Well, I think it's very clear to me in this trip, it was a good opportunity to meet and speak with the President directly, to be able to engage several of his cabinet members, to be able to talk with other governors. And this year we did extend and spend a day at the Capitol. So we had the opportunity to meet with Republican leadership and Democratic leadership. And then we actually had a session with former governors who are now serving in the Congress, and that was very helpful, just in the sense that they truly understand what the responsibilities of governors are and how we might be able to work with the Congress to really serve the people of the United States and the people of the state of Hawaii in general. So it became very clear to me that the President, in his broad pronouncements, have identified a couple of areas that the challenge will be in the details of what would actually get implemented through the budgets or other actions that the Congress needs to take. And, you know, we can start with the Affordable Care Act. You know, there's lots of, there's many Republican governors that have opposed the House proposal because it really does focus on block grants, and it really is about budget cutting rather than really thinking about how we can provide services more efficiently and effectively to our people. So again, a lot of the budget cuts are driven by the President's pronouncement of $54 billion increase in the defense budget. You know, and again, the Congress at the end of the day is the body that will pass the budget. And certainly, I think any real significant increase like that would have to be met with budget cuts. And I think that as you work through the details of what would be required to come up with those kinds of numbers, it would severely impact different agencies or programs that, you know, I'm not exactly certain that the Congress would agree with those cuts.
Do you think it's going to be a wash, though, like if we do get cut with the EPA funds and programs, that maybe we'll see more of a boost in the armed services and military spending here?
Certainly there was optimism in the military sector that the President would increase their budgets, and I think that that was received by them. But I think anyone who has been at the Capitol and interacted with congressional people, both in the House and Senate, realizes that at the end of the day, it's a collaborative process. The President, just as I propose a budget, but it really is the Congress that appropriates the funds.
Governor, it's now been almost 2 months. The way it's described in the media and many other people is that Washington is still in a state of shock and some chaos at the White House. Of course, just recently he's accused President Obama of wiretapping and so forth. You've now been to Washington a couple of times as governor and President Obama. Did you notice any change in the mood and the general environment in D.C.?
Well, there definitely is a lot of uncertainty, I think, in general. Obviously, there's lots of leadership that has yet to be put in place. Just in talking at the National Governors Association, there's 500 or so positions that are considered cabinet level positions. So it's either secretary or assistant secretary, all appointed by the president and confirmed by the Congress. Of the 500 positions, less than 30 or maybe 40 have actually, they've identified a person and they're in the process of confirmation. So clearly you can see, as I went and spoke with some agency people, that there is a vacuum of leadership as the new administration has not been able to get their cabinet member or any of the appointed positions under that in place. And so many of the departments are really just operating with civil servants, and pretty much the existing programs are being carried out in the way that they were prior to the change in administration.
Is that a concern to you?
I mean, certainly I think that it would be helpful for more of the cabinet members to be appointed. In my conversations, I spoke with a couple of the people who are acting, and certainly they were polite, and we had a good conversation about why I think certain issues are important to Hawaii. But, they were just listening and receiving the information because they know that at some point in time, someone will be appointed to lead the department and all the other positions would be filled, and then they are the ones who would be making the policy decisions and setting direction for the
They're
department.
kind of placeholders, aren't they?
Right, they are definitely, but they are committed public servants, trying to carry on the day-to-day activities of the federal government.
What is your sense of this administration's mood to continue funding Honolulu's rail should we meet our April deadline on the recovery plan?
As you know, the president had announced a big investment in infrastructure all across the country. Secretary Chow, in her discussions with the National Governors Association, basically had said that the program is not defined at this point, but that it would probably focus mostly on public-private partnerships, that there would be tax incentives to encourage private sector investment in projects, and for the most part, the projects would have to be public-private partnerships, so would be fee-based, toll roads, or those kinds of activities that there's a benefit for a private sector investment.
Is there a place for something like that in Hawaii, in your opinion?
Well, we have talked a lot about toll roads at the legislature, and, the general consensus by legislators is that it's, I think they would prefer a more broad-based way of funding projects rather than assessing specific fees on different toll roads.
Governor, speaking of the president, there have been bills in the legislature to require presidential candidates to release tax returns in order to either get on the ballot or allow electors to cast their votes for that candidate. What are your thoughts on that bill? I know, or either of the bills in Hawaii. I know the AG was concerned about constitutional challenges. Are you?
Well, I do think that any changes to the process that we elect the president would certainly have to pass the federal constitutional muster. So I don't think that we could place limits on the presidential election that is not consistent with how the election is conducted around the country.
So do you think you wouldn't sign these bills then if they came to your desk?
Well, certainly if the Attorney General says it's unconstitutional, right? I mean, certainly that's something that I would pay attention to.
As to other pending legislation, what do you think of the current form of the rail tax bill for Honolulu?
Well, as I said a year ago, it really is about looking at the funding and exploring what funding sources we have. State legislature and my administrative package had put on the table eliminating the surcharge on the rail as an additional contribution that the state can make. expressed that I think we should explore private sector participation to fund the project. And then finally, that the county ought to be looking at what funds they can add. And then most importantly, it's really defining a project that we can afford, you know, based on the revenues and the funds available.
What would you say to the mayor who may say, it's simply too much, too soon for us to find to satisfy the feds by April?
Well, I have not had the opportunity to speak with the mayor, so I'm not certain. I was hoping to have a private meeting with the Secretary of Transportation, but was unable to do that while I was in DC, so.
Governor, when you took office, you said you would make it a priority to get the renovations at Kamamalu going so that we could occupy that space again. And I don't know if you saw, we ran a story last night about Chief Justice Ramil filing a lawsuit about the asbestos in that building. How are you folks looking at that since you're trying to get the state in that lawsuit?
Well, I'm not certain what the specifics of the lawsuit are, but I do know that there's no asbestos remaining in the building. As you know, it was closed down to deal with asbestos and hazardous material removal. And the material was removed a long time ago. The building sat vacant and empty for a long time, and you know, finally we are getting very close. At the cabinet meeting, we just talked about it being available in March. So we look forward to doing that. As I said, the asbestos has been removed from the building, so that shouldn't be an issue.
Right, but going forward, I mean, it still might be because Bank of Hawaii wants to bring the state of Hawaii into that lawsuit, saying they're responsible for, the condition of the building and, if they're sued.
Well, we'll see what the lawsuit says.
Are you concerned about that, what that might mean for, I don't know, future lawsuits? I mean, Ramil was the first one to sue over it, but lots of people certainly occupied that building for a very long time.
Well, there were, the use of asbestos was prevalent in all buildings all across the state, and the state did take action. For the most part, asbestos is dangerous when it's fried or it's not contained. And clearly, most of the time that asbestos was in state buildings, it was not in a condition that was a health hazard. And the state was pretty aggressive in removing asbestos from all state buildings.
Will you be naming a Board of Education replacement for Daryl Galera by the March 31st advise and consent deadline?
Certainly, that's the objective. The resignation did take us by surprise. It wasn't anticipated, and certainly we will begin the process of identifying someone to fill that seat.
I know you answered us by statement yesterday on some of those same topics, but since we have you here now and folks are wondering, did you know he was interested in superintendent before the resignation?
No, I was not aware that he was interested in applying for the position as superintendent.
Now that he has expressed his interest, what do you think of his candidacy?
Well, I've always said that this is a prime opportunity with all the work that we've done in creating a new blueprint for education for us to find the best leader that can lead the transformation in education. And, I hope that many people will apply, and I do trust that the board will do its responsibility to select the best candidate for the job.
Governor, the Senate just moved the so-called Airbnb bill over to the House. Could you be more specific in terms of what you want to see in terms of specific enforcement powers over illegal vacation rentals if the bill does end up on your desk?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, I have not had a chance to look at the specifics of the bill, but we just have to make sure that a bill passed really adds value to what we're doing. It cannot hide or facilitate illegal vacation rentals. I don't think it really adds any value to our community. So it really is about, it's more than just collecting the taxes. It really is about trying to manage this process that has become available and just assure that we don't have unintended consequences that exacerbates the current situation.
Representative Luke said that she was waiting for some kind of language, compromise language, that you folks would send down to them.
We have been working with many in the industry to talk about different concerns that they have. We definitely want to ensure that there's transparency in the process. And again, we want to minimize any unintended consequences of what the measure would be. You know, from our perspective, you know, it's not like we have to pass a bill. We will only pass a bill or support a bill that really adds value to our community.
Would you be okay with then a task force like they've talked about?
I do think that the more information we have, the better and more helpful it would be.
So even if we have to pass up 26 million or 100 million?
Well, I mean, I think it's deceiving to talk about what the revenue increase would be because they are obligated under current law to pay those taxes. And, you know, we have been working very hard to improve enforcement in that area. And if someone is renting their property, they ought to be paying the taxes. And they are obligated to pay the taxes under existing law.
Governor, going back to that presidential tax returns bill, one other question. The Attorney General said that if the bills were changed so that they basically focus on the electors and say the electors can't cast a vote for a presidential candidate, then the state would have, it's less likely to be challenged because the state actually does have some, say over what the electors do. What do you think of that? Would you be able to support a proposal that focuses on what the electors can do?
I mean, I think, any bill that improves transparency in the electoral process, I think in general is good. But again, with the presidential election, the state of Hawaii can't act as a lone actor. The election process in Hawaii has to be consistent with the electoral process all across the country. And so I think any specific requirements or ways that we would look at adding requirements or parameters to that process just has to be consistent.
What is your goal and what's the latest on teacher contracts? When will that get resolved?
All 14 bargaining units, we are in active negotiations. We've had many meetings with all of them, all of the public servants in state and county employment today. All of those contracts are up. And we do know that the Council on Revenue meets next Monday, and that will be a critical meeting because their revenue projections will be the projections that the budget is based on. And, any changes to the current projections would have significant impact. So, we know that the actual collections on revenues is not meeting the forecasted projection. So we do anticipate that the council would make an adjustment to the current forecast. And then that forecast determines the funds that we have available for the core budget, as well as collective bargaining and any other appropriations in the bills.
As it relates to teachers' leverage, doesn't their leverage grow the closer it gets to the end of one school year, a summer break, and the approach of another school year?
Well, I mean, I think the HSTA and the teachers have to think about how they would want to negotiate. We are very specific and focused. We have 14 units. It's more than teachers. It's principals, it's janitors, it's nurses in the hospitals, it's public safety workers, it's lifeguards. All of those contracts we're actively negotiating, and we are working to get a fair settlement with all of them.
Are we still on track for the Maui Hospital transfer?
Yes,
As far
we
as you
are.
know?
Yes, we are.
And anything new on cool schools? Sorry.
Governor, House moved the bill to do an RFP for a new prison, a proposal for the Waiawa site, with the idea they're keeping an eye on basically moving the inmates back from the mainland. You got any thoughts on that? Does that make sense to you?
I mean, I think that the challenge with prison or jail facility is just the cost. And I do know that when we were building the budget and we asked the departments to identify what their construction needs, the needs for all of the agencies and departments exceeded up $2 billion. So, we know that we have much more needs than we have funds. And I think the challenge will be how does any kind of RFP get funded, and what would be the source of funds that we would use.
Governor, the Attorney General said that he set aside $150,000 on the lawsuit in this round 2 of the immigration order, and that possibly that could be lifted as well. Do you support that?
You know, I have had conversations with the Attorney General, and, you know, there are lots of issues, I think, that we know that we want to, as the state of Hawaii, stand up as appropriate with the new federal administration. You know, in this area, specific area, especially when it deals with an executive order that we believe discriminates on the basis of national origin, that we need to take a stand. It's just an important issue to our community, and this is one specific area that we have had a very specific conversation, and we both felt that this was something that we needed to do on behalf of the people of Hawaii.
So if it costs more than $150, you support?
Certainly, you know, we will be working with the Attorney General to manage the cost and figure out what's the best way forward. As you know, even in the first lawsuit, there were other states that felt the same way and joined in the lawsuit. You know, as you may know, Doug is the chair of the Western Attorneys General, and he does have contact with many others, Attorneys General across the country. In fact, Hawaii is hosting the Western Attorney Generals next week, and so many of them will actually be in Hawaii. So, you know, I think that it is something, I mean, we definitely will not be pursuing a lawsuit in each and every instance where there's a disagreement with our administration and the federal government, but this is a fundamental value that I think is important for Hawaii to take a stand.
The president had brief words with the Attorney General, and too much to Kevin's question earlier. Besides those, that interchange, did you sense in Washington, or even after this most recent filing, any possible repercussions from the president, who is not shy about calling out critics with either veiled or outright threats?
You know, I do know that the president, you know, what you see on TV is what you get. He is, as he presents himself. You know, I think I did have the opportunity to meet with Secretary of Homeland Security, General Kelly, and talk about immigration and a whole lot of other things. You know, he basically said that, you know, there is no significant change in the immediate process. You know, they will be looking at strengthening the vetting process for immigration, but he doesn't have the resources or the personnel for any kind of stepped up focus on immigrants. And in fact, the conversation that we had, he basically said that there would be no deportation of illegal immigrants except for those that are found guilty of crimes. So, you know, I do say this, that the devil is in the details, and the question becomes what specific changes would actually be able to be implemented in the agencies. You know, so I know that there are several questions about, you know, what is the immediate impact to the state, you know, what funds are in jeopardy. And I left the Capitol with the feeling that change will be slow to come, you know, that there are lots of pronouncements by different people about significant changes to policy. And I do think that the reality of governing, the reality of being able to get the Congress to pass law changes, the reality of repealing regulations will slow any specific impact on Hawaii.
Governor, you had someone selected to look at federal funds and how we might be able to grow those funds. Are you having that person also take stock of what we could lose? Because we're also talking bodies tied to programs, I think even in the AG's office.
Right, so we did have that conversation. You know, we are doing an assessment, budget and finances, looking at all the federal funds that we currently get, looking at the sources of the funds and what things would be formula-based and the things that would be competitive grants. And we certainly are looking at and keeping track of those areas that would be most vulnerable. But my sense is that any changes would be incremental and not as dramatic as it might sound.
Go to one last one. Do you have any strong views on the death with dignity bill that's still, just moved out of the Senate?
I did vote in support of the bill the last time it was before the Senate. I didn't really have a chance to look at that specific, but I do generally support the notion that people should be able to, if they are terminally ill, be afforded the ability to receive medication to end their lives.
Everybody got what you need?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.